Hello, peeps. Welcome to the Culture and People Cast. Today we have Emily Goodson. Emily, in a few sentences, would you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. So I am the founder and CEO of CultureSmart. We are an advising and consulting firm that helps startups and small to medium-sized businesses be their most inclusive and high-performing selves. My background's in education and counseling, and I've always been really focused on bringing out the potential in others, whether that's an individual or whether that's an organization.
So I was going to ask, what's your favorite thing about this work? So is it that potential in others?
I think I think when I made the shift from, I started out as a teacher and then moved into career counseling. And I think when I made that shift, one of the things I saw is that there's such potential to drive impact through workplaces. And what I mean by that is, positive societal impact. And so, yes, I do love bringing out the potential in others. And I have some coaching clients where, I coach them one-on-one, and seeing them live up to their potential is super rewarding. But I think almost the more rewarding is when I see an organization really driving positive impact across the entire workplace.
Yeah. And it's not an easy thing,
Right.
and I think a lot of people,
Yeah.
because I've, been doing this for quite a while, like you, it's like a lot of people will hear us and sort of, oh, I want to do it. I want to get better. I want the culture to advance. I want my company to grow, whatever word you want to attach there. But then when they hear the work involved, they're like, oh, I guess we're okay. And look, that's an okay answer.
Yeah.
If you're okay with where you're at, cool.
Yeah.
Call me when or if it goes sideways, right? If it ever feels like you're not aligned, if it ever feels like you're not getting the results you need business or people wise, then you need partners like us, because you have to be ready. You have to be ready to put in the work, because
Yep.
it's not for the faint at heart. But regardless, and this is what I think, Emily, I think people put in the work, but they put in the work on the back end to clean up the mistakes and the messes and the lack of confusion. I just want them to put the work here, or maybe even like here.
I love that, Anna. And that's honestly why I started my business which I don't even think you knew this, but I was the head of talent people at 2 venture-backed startups in Washington, DC, and loved it. But my major takeaway was, particularly my last startup, I came in at about 60 employees, 50 employees, and I was their first kind of strategic level HR hire. And I thought, I really wish you'd brought me in at 20. I really wish you'd brought me in at 15, right? And because those small changes at the beginning make such a big impact. And it's so much easier to proactively set up your talent systems and your people systems than to back out of them, right? Or correct something you did earlier that you may not even have been intentional about it. It may have just been a precedent you set, not thinking about it, but it's so hard to back out of these things. So that's when I started my business. I primarily focused on startups under 50 employees. And I still have a decent chunk of my business there. But I like focusing on these startups because I think they have the innovation to, sort of change the market and change our day-to-day lives, often for the positive. And at the same time, in order for them to make their biggest impact on the market, their people and culture systems have to be right.
Right.
And part of that is getting it right from day one.
I know. Well, so let's talk about employee engagement. I'm hearing from leaders right now that engaging talent is a challenge. And I want everybody to hear, when we say engaging talent, we're really talking about, yes, of course, making our humans feel good, but we're talking about the results that they produce. So it's a challenge. What are your thoughts on engagement as a whole?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So a couple of thoughts that I've been thinking about recently and talking about with my clients. Number one, mental health. And I know this is a topic that a lot of workplaces shy away from.
Yeah.
And I get that. I personally think we are at such a pivotal time in this country, and the mental health illnesses, the rates are skyrocketing. And it's very sad. And it's not just, I've read people who've gotten COVID-19 have a higher um, are more likely to have a mental health
Oh, sure.
illness down the
Yeah,
road. I've read that
yeah.
children are getting are having mental health concerns because they don't understand what's going on. So I bring all this up to say, I know we haven't traditionally discussed this in the workplace, but we have to. Like,
Yeah,
we
there's no,
can't.
it's not an option anymore,
Correct.
you
It's not
know?
negotiable because it's bleeding in. We can't, you and I both know that everyone brings their whole selves to work, whether you can try to compartmentalize it, but you can't. And, to your point, like, engagement is all about the outcome, right? We all want high performance. We all want happy employees. We all want inclusive workplaces. And if we don't sort of get a handle around either what resources can we provide to address sort of people's anxieties and mental health, how can we equip managers to talk to people? If we can't, sort of understand how to start working on this, I really am afraid it's going to be a larger epidemic long term.
I know. I actually got a little choked up while you're talking because I'm so worried. My whole quest is restoring humanity into our work and our workplaces.
Yeah.
And people say like, "Oh, we're good." No, we're not.
We're not good. We're not good.
We were so far off even before COVID, right? Look at the statistics. And look, surveys are one thing, but when only like a third of our workforce is actually truly engaged, self-reported. Yes,
Sure.
I really love what I do and I think I'm giving it my best. Only a third of our workplace means we're wasting money and we're affecting humanity because that other 2/3 is just like, I always think about, remember those people the balloons outside of the cell phone that were like, and they get blown up. That's what they're like. There's no grounding. There's no tethering. And we need more tethering. And so, yes, I wholeheartedly agree. So let's get really tactical then. Because I think you and I could talk, I'm getting all riled up. You and I could talk forever about this, but let's get really
I'll get on my soapbox.
for the people on the call. Maybe it's a people leader. Maybe it's an individual contributor employee. What can we do? What can they do to advance the culture or the people practices in their own organization?
Yeah. So I think, going off of that, comment about mental health and, people being their whole selves and working at their best level, I think two practical things come to mind right now. I think the first is this is not the time to sidestep team building. Because I think, a lot of people have been waiting and waiting and waiting for the pandemic to be over, and it's not over, and we've got a ways to go. Apart from that, we've got the recession, we've got political confusion. There's a lot going on. And I think team building, I'm very, I'm sort of championing team building right now because I think I've never seen our workplaces feel so divided, to be quite honest. And I think, there's a lot of assumptions going on that like, you have kids, you have it the hardest, you're single, it's easy for you. We're making a lot of assumptions about people's experiences, not to mention, I think there's this whole dimension that a lot of us are missing of, yes, the majority of tech companies are all working from home, and that's got its own sort of host of implications. There are a lot of people going into the office. I think when I live in San Diego. And so I think about here, like the defense space, the biotech space, there are a lot of people, a lot of my friends are going into the office, and that's very scary for them, right? They're in masks, they're in, sort of protective equipment, but it's scary, right? And then by default, sorry, their experience is different from some of their teammates because some are going in, some aren't going in. And so all of that to say, I just think team building is huge because we have got to find a way to do virtual team building that looks different, whether that's, over Zoom, whether it's, sort of a, trivia contest over Zoom, whether it's a painting class over Zoom, whether it's creating different Slack channels. Yeah. There are lots of things you can do, but we can't just ignore it. And I think, I know I'm rambling, but like one last point, internal communications are a huge part of this for me. And I'm seeing lots of people kind of let the team meetings slide or let the one-on-one slide. And we can't do that. We cannot do this. I think particularly I'm seeing a lot of sort of, um, team members, they're feeling disconnected in general. And then if you don't have a team or an all organization meeting on top of that, people are on an island, and that's going to cause them to feel more divided, more anxious. And it's just this vicious circle.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I know there are a lot of leaders out there that probably even before COVID did not meet our, maybe you and I, standard in terms of how frequently they were doing team meetings or one-to-ones.
Yeah.
And I have to say, from a human perspective, I sort of think about that leader and think, God, they might be feeling like, well, I can't start now. That's just going to look like I'm doing it for no reason or for COVID only. But it's like, but the alternative is not okay. The alternative is not doing anything. And so we need to be humble as leaders and say, like, look, guys, this has opened my eyes to how important my connection individually and collectively with our team is. And I'm going to work at it. And I want you to work at it too.
I agree. It's, what's coming to my mind is that, that quote, I'm sure you've seen it around. I can't remember who said it, but it's, what happens if we train all of our people to be better and they leave? And the other person responds with, what if we don't?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
It's the same thing. It's like, if you don't, yes, I can't remember who said the quote, but it also reminds me of, the book High Leverage Management by Andy Grove. And, it's this whole idea, or high output, sorry, it's called High Output Management, but it's this idea of leverage, right? Like, you as a manager yes, it can be annoying to have a one-on-one. Yes, I know you have a billion things going on. I get it. But if you take 30 minutes to empower that person, they're going to go out there and do amazing things that you couldn't accomplish by yourself. But if you don't take that time,
yeah,
we've seen, I can give you examples. It can just be disastrous of people, they don't understand context. They don't tell somebody they're ready to quit. The list goes on.
I have an all virtual team, and even my right-hand person, who's my integrator, we meet weekly. And, she oversees some of my other staff. So I don't meet with them all the time, but she and I are definitely, once a week. And almost every time afterwards, she will text or Vox or whatever communication we're using that day and be like, I'm so jazzed about this next week. Like, and I fill her up. Like, it's literally like a cup, and I get filled up too. And so like, without that, it is that hot air balloon that has one rope tied to it that is just like flailing in the wind. And we have got to do better than that. And if you can't do better than that, then do something else besides be a leader. There are plenty of other things, specialty roles that you can go do, but these roles should be like critically important in organizations.
I 100% agree. And that's, in terms of tactical, one of the things that I've been talking about recently is, what do I do about my learning development budget when it's COVID, when it's, budgets are strapped, all that. And I tell everyone, hands down, invest in managers, like people leaders. Like, if you can't afford anything else, like, invest in a people manager training series, because particularly in startups, people get promoted into management roles who don't have prior experience, don't have prior training, right? And it's, people managers are such big, drivers of engagement. Well, 70 Gallup says, I think it's 70% variance in engagement scores is determined by who your manager is.
Yes. The research has shown, and we've been studying that for so long. And I just think it's so powerful. So I think from the tactical recommendation, this is great. I want to talk forever and ever, but mental health, don't shy away, formal and informal, do something, practice that humility. I think those are some great suggestions. So Emily, let's do a quick shout out. Who else is doing some really good work in the ring, as I say, in the ring around culture and people? Maybe it's even a potential guest.
I don't know if you know this person, but I am the biggest fan of Gary Ware.
I don't think so. How do you spell his last name?
Ware.
Okay.
He is phenomenal. So he's here in San Diego with me, and so we have a culture community here in San Diego that Gary and I started. And Gary's phenomenal for many reasons, but two I'll highlight is, number one, he He does a lot of improv work with organizations. And that's a phenomenal way to kind of do that team building differently, as I mentioned. And, he'll come in and do improv games over Zoom to help build teams.
Nice.
It's incredible. And then secondly, he is just the best example of sort of a wonderful ally and supporter for women. And I'll speak for myself as a woman founder who has really struggled this year with building a business and the imposter syndrome and, all of it. There has never been a time where he hasn't been, even today, literally 4 hours ago, picked up the phone. I said, am I thinking the right thing here? Yeah. And every single time he's willing to do it. And I just think we need those type of men in organizations and in the world. And so anyway, I think would be a phenomenal guest, but also he's just a good influencer sort of in the culture space to follow.
Oh, it's so great. Well, you make me want to know him for sure. So
glowing. You definitely want to know. I posted on my Instagram this morning. I reshared with his, he had posted a quote yesterday that said something to the effect of failure isn't failure if you've learned from it. And I reshared it and I said, if you don't know Gary Ware, follow him right now.
Okay, I'll check that out for sure on Instagram. I know we're connected there.
Yeah.
Okay, so resources here. So Emily, you mentioned high output management, right? So that's one book. Are there other resources that you believe you'd recommend to help advance our thinking around people and culture?
Yeah, I have a couple. So I'm a big fan of the book Applied Empathy by Michael Ventura. Which all my clients are probably sick of me talking about it ad nauseum, but he gets into what he calls empathy archetypes. And I think it's very helpful because it's like almost like a Myers-Briggs or a DISC for empathy. And I think empathy is one of those words that we don't think we can learn it. We don't think we can get better at it, which is a complete lie. And I think this book does a really good job of showing us how we can practice taking on different empathy skills.
I'm going to look into that because I often, I use StrengthsFinder, Clifton Strengths through Gallup as one of my coaching tools. And I will work with an executive or a founder and they find out, just a quick note for everybody else, your StrengthsFinder comes in a list of 34 and they're ranked by the way you answer the question. And, empathy will be at 34 and they're like, well, I'm done. I have no empathy. I'm like, no. Like you show your empathy through your top strengths. So let's talk about that. So I would love a resource like that. Those archetypes would be super important.
You should definitely look up. It's a phenomenal book. I heard him speak, I think last year at the Culture Amp conference.
Okay, good.
And was so impressed. Went out immediately and bought the book.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay. So 2 books, any other podcasts or anything from you that you've put out? We can certainly link to that too, Emily.
Well, thank you. I do put out a monthly newsletter. So my website is workculturesmart.com. And you can sign up there for the newsletter. I also am pretty active on Instagram and LinkedIn. So that's also Work Culture Smart. And a lot of I blog quite a bit. I have my most recent blogs were about, actually I have a really interesting one. We won't get into it because it'll take us on a tangent. One of my most recent blogs is about disability in the workplace and how we need to now realize that if your team is working virtually, basically all disabilities can be invisible now.
Right.
And it's highly possible you could onboard somebody who has a physical disability and not know it because you're only interacting with them over this.
Sure. Right.
So,
and what does that look like for their productivity, their satisfaction, their engagement, right? That's part of who they are. So how do we incorporate that? Precisely. That's a great point. That's a great point. Thank you. Emily, thank you for being a guest today. And thank you more than that for all you're doing for people and culture in the world of work. I just really, really appreciate what you've got. Of
course. Well, likewise. This was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Peace and progress, everybody.